Just by way of a little bit of introduction, because it's I think fairly difficult to have someone just sort of parachute in and preach a passage and then parachute out, although I'm theoretically scheduled for August 3rd as well. We'll see how today goes, and then we'll confirm August 3rd. But I have served as a pastor in the Doylestown area. I presently am not in that capacity. I work in operations management for a home improvement company. I have a couple of my kids with me this morning. There's Ruby and Ben. They're waving at me rather than you. So my wife and one of my sons are in Florida this morning, and then I've got another son that is a bit of a prodigal. And so anyway, there's some challenge there. I did want to take just a moment to commend you. Many churches do not afford their pastors a sabbatical. And I was actually chatting with a couple of your elders about this morning. A lot of that is because most people don't really understand why a pastor would go on sabbatical or need sabbatical. And in reality, there's no job in the world where a man and his family carry the weight and the burdens of a group of people 24/7. That guy and his family are on call all the time. If you've ever looked at President of the United States and thought, that's a busy job, it is. And your pastor serves in a similar capacity, but with the one distinction that he is and his family are the primary target of the enemy when it comes to GraceWay Church. And so he has not just the weight of the ministry and the weight of the difficulty of life that he carries for all of you, but he also has the burden of spiritual attack all the time. And so that you have set aside this time for him to go and to rest is really commendable. And I just am grateful that you have done that. I'm grateful that I get to be here and be part of that support mechanism. And that's all I'll say. One tiny caveat. Send him on another one soon. All right. It will be good for him and good for you. Okay, so Luke chapter 10, verses 25 and following. We're going to be talking about the Good Samaritan this morning. So let's read the passage together. And behold, a lawyer stood up to put him to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And he said to him, What is written in the law? How do you read it? And he answered, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. And it would have been great if the lawyer had walked away at that point. But then we wouldn't have gotten the benefit of the rest. Verse 29, but he, that is the lawyer, and when it says lawyer, it's not really speaking in a legal sense. This is a religious scholar. He, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, And who is my neighbor? Jesus replied, A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay when I come back. Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? And he said, The one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, "You go and do likewise." The word of the Lord. When I was a younger man, married a couple of years, my wife was all of a sudden expecting, and we were very expectant. First child on the way, and several weeks later, we were no longer expecting. She had a fairly early miscarriage, and it was surprising, I would say, how affected we were by that. Just in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks to go from being pregnant to not pregnant, and it was jarring for us in a way that I wouldn't have anticipated. Just a couple weeks pregnant. It was almost a blink, almost like we hadn't been. And when I say we, I mean her. And we dealt with that, and life moved on, and work and life and faith and those sorts of things. And fast forward a couple years, and all of a sudden, our firstborn, who I already mentioned is our prodigal, was in utero. And all of the difficulty of that first pregnancy sort of came crashing back. Not so much difficulty as fear, because we had walked through one of these before, and it had ended in really pretty tragic disappointment. And so I found myself in this space of, I'm going to set this down because I'm not actually going to drink from it. I found myself in this space of just being panicked all the time. How am I going to keep this kid in there until he's fully cooked? And it took me several weeks to get to the place of realizing nothing. I'm doing nothing. All I'm doing is worrying, and it is accomplishing zero. I am going to have to let the one who is in charge of life handle the matters of life. And then the pregnancy went very well. Sam actually stayed in there an extra 2 weeks. My wife went 42 weeks and a day with all 4 of our children. She gave birth naturally to all 4, 3 of them at home. And they are all still with us, although one of them is on Craigslist. Now, when Sam popped out, healthy, breathing, 7 pounds, 6 ounces, we stayed in the hospital for a couple days. We came home, we put him in his bassinet next to the bed, and all of a sudden the fear that had been present in me those first several weeks of the pregnancy came crashing back. Because all of a sudden I was in this place of, well, how am I going to keep him alive now? How am I going to keep him breathing? And graciously, the Lord brought me to a similar spot much faster. I'm not going to do anything. I can't make sure that he breathes. I can't make sure that I keep breathing. I'm going to have to leave life to the one who's in charge of life. All of life is that way. All of life, especially all of the Christian life, is miracle. Because God is the one at the center of all of it, making it all happen. If you hear nothing else this morning, hear the words of the Scriptures. If you have space for one more thing, hear this. You go and do likewise is not mindset, and it is not mandate. It is miracle. Let me say that one more time. You go and do likewise. What Jesus says to this lawyer It is not mindset, and it is not mandate. It is miracle. What we watch the Samaritan do is not just good Christian character. It is God doing in a person what we can't do on our own. Spoiler alert. The message of the Good Samaritan is not to just simply be nicer. It's not to be better. It's not to be more Christian. The message is actually that you can't, apart from the giver of life. And that when he does that through you, it is not because you have changed your mindset or you have responded to a mandate. It is because you have become the miracle. So let's dig a little bit into this passage, and hopefully what I just said is actually there. So we sort of parachute in, and we're going to look a little bit at the greater context of this passage in a few minutes. But we kind of parachute into Luke 10 with this interaction between Jesus and this lawyer. And this lawyer stands up, and it's not from out of nowhere, but his intention is to put Jesus to the test. That's a bad place to start. I appreciate, actually, that Jesus just simply responds to him matter-of-factly. Jesus treats it based on face value. The lawyer tries to put him to the test. Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus says, what do you think? You've read the law. And this lawyer responds very well, according to Jesus. Jesus actually says, you've answered correctly. Do this and you'll live. And the answer that the teacher gives is from the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And he also tacks on, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so, actually, this is something that Jesus himself says when asked by someone else, hey, what's the greatest commandment? Jesus actually pulls these two texts from different Old Testament passages and puts them together. And so we don't know for sure, but one of the likelihoods here is that this guy has actually been traveling around with the disciples and has heard Jesus say something like this. So he's fairly religious, he's paying attention, he's engaging, and yet at the same time we can see he's got a flaw or two, right? Looking to put Jesus to the test, and then unfortunately chapter 10 verse 29 is where we really see his heart. But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, and who is my neighbor? And this is, when I was in my role as pastor, I was the pastor of care for about 7 years at a Baptist church. I used to say that I was the best at caring. That's why I was the pastor of care. And our senior pastor would regularly remind me that actually I was the only one they had to pay to care. But much of my role saw people in desperate, difficult times, and oftentimes that meant I saw them at their worst. And I would say that one of the biggest problems with the human heart, not with this guy, but with humans, you and me, is the inclination that we have to justify ourselves, to prop ourselves up and make us feel better. I did it actually during the Addams Family song, Meredith, right? I thought, my goodness, I am so glad that I don't have to directly follow this ever energetic woman, me, the ever low energy guy. Like, the comparison between the two is just, it's just sad, right? So Meredith is up here, and I'm going to have to follow. There was self-justification even in that. We do it all the time. I am regularly a part of a sales force, and we compare. I sell better than that guy. Well, maybe I don't sell as well as that guy, but at least I don't lie to my customers. Okay, maybe my sales numbers aren't this, but at least I'm consistent. I'm not the guy that's up and down and up. We do it in every area of life. I feed my children the right kind of fruits and vegetables. We buy organic from Whole Foods. I wouldn't dress that way. I wouldn't talk like that. Doesn't matter what manner of life, what color you are, it matters what your gender is. But for the sake of this argument, it doesn't matter what your gender is. You are always trying to justify yourself. Always trying to see yourself as better than someone. If we look at prison culture, they demonstrate it to the nth degree. There is a category of prisoner that is the worst. They're typically sexual offenders, and the rest of the prison culture says, but at least I'm not that. We are always doing that in nearly every circumstance to make ourselves feel better about ourselves. And so while we see this lawyer do it, and we can see in black and white that what he is doing is improper, even evil, it's really hard to turn and look at the mirror and see, I actually do what this guy's doing all the time. And so here he is, trying to elevate himself. He's actually standing amidst all of the disciples whom Jesus has said have their names written in heaven. And he is then trying to draw praise and adoration even from Jesus to say, well, yeah, but I'm even a step better than them, right? And Jesus tells this story. A man going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. We don't really know anything about the man other than where he's traveling and that harm befalls him. Robbers strip him, beat him, depart, and leave him half dead. And by chance, a priest is going down, passes by on the other side. Also, a Levite, when he came down, passed by on the other side. Now, a fair question would be, what's the difference between a priest and a Levite? And actually, they have fairly similar offices. Both a priest and a Levite would be from the tribe of the Jewish tribe of Levi. A priest happens to be within the line of Aaron, and so that's a subset of the entire tribe of Levi. And you have to be from the tribe of Aaron in order to be a priest, but everybody within the tribe of Levi really participates in temple worship. And so this second guy, this Levite, is likely, well, he's for sure not a priest, but he's likely engaged in things that happen in and around the temple, whether that's a temple guard, he might be a worship leader, he might be a legal scholar. And I think that's actually where this gets really interesting, is that Jesus picks out, okay, a priest and then a Levite, and the guy that he's talking to is probably a Levite. Almost certainly a Levite, because he is a lawyer. He's a religious scholar. And so then one of the questions that we will never know the answer to until we get to ask Jesus, or maybe this lawyer is actually in the kingdom at this point. Maybe we can ask him. But we'll never know. Is Jesus recounting an experience this guy has already had? There's really no one else that could do that other than Jesus. Know that this guy has actually walked past a beaten man on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho and crossed on the other side for whatever reason. Now, particularly if you're a priest, there might be a legitimate reason to cross by on the other side because they had certain purification requirements that if they touched dead bodies would prevent them from serving in their role for a certain amount of time until they went through purification ritual. A Levite wouldn't have necessarily had those, and so probably that reasoning is not applicable to this lawyer. But either way, we have two individuals from a tribe that has been set aside for worship, for service in the temple. And both of them drive right on past, just like the last 8 or 9 or 10 people pulled over on the side of the road that you just zoomed right past. Now, this is not a sermon that says that the application here is to stop on the side of the road the next time you see some. They have a cell phone. They might have AAA. Geico probably has them covered. And honestly, in our particular culture, there are probably some people that really don't want strangers stopping and potentially accosting them on the side of the road. That's not the message here. I don't want you to stop. I'm not telling you not to stop, but the application here is not that. So hold on for the application. We'll get there. Don't assume just yet. Now, Jesus throws the curveball here. He says, okay, we've got this set-aside, separate tribe that is special for a certain purpose to the Lord in Israel, the tribe of Levi. 2 representatives, they both pass by, basically ignoring this guy. And then comes bumbling along this Samaritan. Now, if you have been in Sunday school, been around the church for any significant amount of time, you know that Samaritans are not viewed kindly by the Jews. They don't like each other, and really Samaritans are considered whatever's below second-class citizens. They're not citizens. They're animals. It's actually pretty common in Jewish literature of this time period to refer to most everyone that wasn't Jewish as a dog, and not like the puppy, beagle, like cuddly, lovey, like the ravenous, dangerous, mangy, dirty, disgusting, like that sort of a dog. Here comes this guy, and Jesus describes him as though he is the pinnacle, as though he's the example. When the Samaritan man saw this guy, he had compassion. Well, the Levite didn't have compassion. And the priest didn't have compassion. What else did he have? He went to him and he bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Oil being more of a salve, wine being more antiseptic in nature. So he's caring for him both in a care and almost a medical sense. Then he set him on his own animal. We don't. This is a weird Near Eastern ancient culture sort of a thing. We don't think about, when people get set on horses for horseback riding all the time. Set this 12-year-old girl on this horseback and go off. We don't really think about the context here, but when you set someone on your animal and you walk next to the animal, you are putting them in the position of master and putting yourself in the position of slave. This guy is naturally humbling himself and putting this stranger into the place of honor and taking for himself the place of shame in an honor-shame culture. He takes him to an inn. The next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave. He's giving of money. He's being sacrificial, right? We see compassion. We see care. We see humility. We see sacrifice. These are all really good things. These are actually Christian things that this guy is displaying. Things that we don't see from what are supposed to be the examples, from the religious leaders. We see really good things from him. And then Jesus says, which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? And I really wish that we could see facial expression from this lawyer. I wish we could hear the intonation of how he says it. He says the one who showed him mercy. He can't, at least it seems like, he can't bring himself to say the Samaritan. And I wonder why that is. I think to some degree there's a significant amount of pride here. But even more so, I don't think that we fully grasp how much the Jews hated the Samaritans. And I will say, not entirely inappropriately so. See, we often look at this, I think, as an ethnic issue. So, you know, it would be as though white was looking down on black, or Asian was looking down on Hispanic. And that's not really what we're talking about here, because the Samaritans were basically godless. The reason that the Jews hated the Samaritans so much is that when the remnant that came back from Babylon with Nehemiah and Ezra, and they began to rebuild Jerusalem and rebuild the temple, the Samaritans were there waiting for them in order to sabotage everything they were trying to do, taking sides with the captors. They were the traitors. They lacked any moral compass. And as the centuries went on from there, in roughly 500 AD, they got worse. They were much like the judges who did what was right in their own eyes. And when we develop a moral compass that is based on what we think is right, it gets ugly. The result is godlessness everywhere. And so I wonder if a better substitute for us, if we were to say, okay, what would this Samaritan be like? I think perhaps it would be helpful if Jesus said to us, there was a priest and there was a seminary professor, and they walked past, and then came upon this Jewish man who had been beaten and robbed, the warden of a Nazi concentration camp. That would probably be a better equivalent, just in terms of us figuring out how exactly did the Jews view Samaritans. It's not just simply that this story would have been unpalatable or distasteful to them. It's that they would have looked at it as an impossibility. There's no way that a Samaritan who is godless could behave in a godly manner. And I would say, yeah, that's right. The thing that makes a person godly is not what they do. It's who they have. It's who they know. The thing that makes a person godly is God. So it doesn't matter whether or not you stop on the side of the road next time you see someone pulled over with a flat tire or whatever. Again, you don't need to. They have a cell phone. Just keep going. It'll work out. The thing that makes us godly is not the thing that we do. It's the miracle worker working in us. If you expand your view a little bit within this passage, I want to read the paragraph that falls just beneath this. After Jesus says, "You go and do likewise," to the lawyer. Luke 10:38. Now, as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. And she went up to him and said, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to serve all alone? Well, tell her to help me." Martha's bossy. I know some Marthas. But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her." It's possible that Luke had ADD. I don't think he did. The way he starts both this gospel and the book of Acts, which he also wrote, is to say that his goal is to put down an ordered account. And oftentimes, the way that we look at the scriptures is very compartmentalized. We look at the Good Samaritan, but we don't really look at the context around it. But what does this have to do with that? Again, it's possible that Luke had ADD and he just was picking random stories and just throwing them down onto the papyrus and without much rhyme or reason. That wouldn't much account for the Holy Spirit breathing the words of life onto the page like we're told happened. But it's possible. But I think the alternative is a much better one. That Luke had a very intentional point of putting this account right after the Good Samaritan. Because what we see here is what Jesus doesn't want to happen. He doesn't want you to hear the parable of the Good Samaritan and then work harder. We see Martha do that. I mean, she doesn't hear the parable, but we see her do that within the context of this account. That Jesus says, "Hey, this didn't happen, this guy did it, now go and do likewise." And then we see someone serving, really working hard to be better, to be hospitable, to be sacrificial, to care in ways that meet other people's needs. And Jesus says, "No, you're not quite getting it. You're afoul of where I want you to be." Mary actually is the one who's not doing anything. And yet, she's the one that's doing what he wants. And so I want to back up, and I want to look now above. Let's see here, 10:17. So this is now we're getting the bookends of the Good Samaritan. 10:17. The 72 returned with joy, saying, "Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name." And he said, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Behold, I have given you authority to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall hurt you. Nevertheless, don't rejoice in this, that the spirits are subject to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven. And the line that I want to draw here, that I want to connect for you, as this account starts with this sending out of the 72 who do all sorts of miracles, they cast out demons, they heal the sick, there are many different miraculous accounts that come from this. They come back just overjoyed, saying, Jesus, you won't believe the cool stuff that we did. And there's no question in their minds where it generated from. They weren't doing it before Jesus showed up. It wasn't generated, they weren't the miraculous sort. They were just rough and tumble fishermen. And all of a sudden they're going out and doing miraculous things. And Jesus says, yeah, and that's not nothing. Double negative there. My wife would be very displeased. He says, if you think that's cool, don't forget that your names are written in heaven. That's an even greater miracle that has happened here. And the line that I want you to see here is that the group of 70, this ragtag group of rough and tumble fishermen and other guys in need of discipleship, I'll say that, do these miraculous things. And then a Samaritan comes along and acts godly. A thing they can't do. They're not capable of. They're godless. And then a woman just sits, doing nothing and soaking up the teaching of Jesus, instead of being busy and about the management of her home. Don't mishear, I'm not saying management of the home is a bad thing. Proverbs 31 is a very important passage. Management of the home on the male side is also very good. But the things that are happening in this passage are happening because of Jesus. Not because anyone in this passage tried harder, followed some example, did something more. And here's the real, take a look back at verse 29. This is the real crux of the whole thing. That he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" See, before this passage, and maybe even after this passage, the lawyer would have said that he's better than a Samaritan. This passage doesn't teach that the Samaritan is better than the lawyer, or that the Samaritan is better than the priest, or better than the Levite, or better than the 72, or better than Mary or Martha. This passage teaches that we're all at the same spot. We're all on the same plane. And that's a godless one. We are left to ourselves in our natural state, sinners who don't do what's right. Romans 3, there's none of us righteous, not even one. We don't even seek after righteousness, according to Romans 3. And so Jesus' point in this parable is not to be better, to try harder, to change your mindset, to follow some mandate. It is to recognize that we can do no good thing apart from him. And what that means is that the good things that we do are miraculous because God is the one doing them. If you hear anything other than the scriptures this morning, hear this. Go and do likewise. It's not a mindset or a mandate. It's a miracle. And what we see Mary do at the end of this passage is the thing that we all need to do. See, one of the interesting things actually about Samaritans and the other dogs that are referenced in the Gospels of the New Testament is that they all seem to get that they're dogs. There's a Canaanite woman that Jesus meets, and she wants help from him, and he says, it's not right to take the kids' bread and give it to the dogs. That's not a very flattering thing for Jesus to say. It's a fairly un-Jesus-like thing for Jesus to say, now that we have made him in our own image. And she says, yeah, but even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the table. She doesn't say, no, I'm not a dog. I'm more like a Samaritan that would stop and help someone out on the side of the road. No, she owns it. Yes, I am a dog in need of your help. There's the tax collector that Jesus references. It stands next to the Pharisee who's just so glad to not be anyone other than himself. And the tax collector who can't even look up to heaven, who just beats himself on the chest, begging for mercy as a sinner. See, that's who the Samaritan is. He's not godly, but that's also who the Levite is, and the priest, and the disciples, and Mary, and Martha, and you, and me. We are in and of ourselves sinful, depraved, fallen. And the good things that occur because we have approached the throne of grace and said, help. Go and do likewise. Go and do likewise. That's a fairy tale. How am I supposed to do that as the dirty, miserable, rotten sinner that I am? I need you to help. And any time we think that we can accomplish the good things in the Scriptures apart from his help, we are more like the legal scholar, more like the priest, more like the Levite than we are like the Samaritan. When we recognize that the good things that he's talking about, compassion, hospitality, sacrifice, humility, those don't just spring up from us trying harder. They spring up from us making an appeal to the Holy Spirit to do something in us that is miraculous. They're not just good works. They're miracles. Father, would you convict our hearts? Father, help us to see what you see. That we are dead apart from you, and that there is no life or fruit or goodness that occurs unless you are the one that brings it and causes it to happen. And so, God, help us to be wholly dependent upon you for every good thing. I ask it through the Son and by the Spirit. Amen.